Good morning, marvelous mathematicians. Today we are going to develop measuring length in lesson 26, session 2. Now, in order to work on this today, you are going to need your ruler. So go ahead and grab your ruler if you don't have it. And then let's start on page 555. Okay, first part. Read and try to solve the problem below. Brian is measuring the lengths of 6 earthworms. These are earthworms. Have you seen earthworms? They're kind of cool, but kind of slimy. The earthworms he collected are shown. Describe how he could find the length of each earthworm to the nearest 1/4 inch. So the 1/4 inch or 1/4 inch. Now remember, on our ruler marks 0, 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, 4 inch, but these little lines in between are our scale. That means we are actually measuring by 1/4 inches, by 1/4 inches, because notice between 0 and 1, they've split it into 4 sections. So each section is 1/4. This is 2/4, which is really 1/2, and then 3/4. So we're going to measure today to the 1/4 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch. So let's look at back. What do we need to do? Describe how he could find the length of each earthworm to the nearest 1/4 inch. How can he do this? We can use a ruler, right? A ruler will help us do this. Now, just to make sure that we know how we're measuring, if you want to pause the video and measure them on your own, then you can come back and see if you measured correctly. I'm going to go ahead and start measuring them now. Now remember, to measure, I have to line up my 0 with the one end of the worm. And let me see, I might zoom in for this. So hopefully I remember to unzoom in a little bit. Okay, here we go. There. Okay, so I'm going to line up the 0 right at one end of the worm. And then I'm going to look at where the other end goes. So notice that the other end, it falls between this line and this line. Now, this is 1 1/4. This is 1 2/4, or because it's equivalent fraction, we call it 1 1/2, 1 1/2. So notice that the tip of the worm is closer to the 1 1/2 than it is to the 1 1/4. Notice here's 1 1/4, and it goes all the way here, and it's almost to the 1 1/2. So this worm is 1 1/2 inches. Okay. How about worm B? Lay my 0 right at the end of one end of the worm, and then I'm going to measure all the way over here. So notice now this end of the worm is somewhere between this line and this line. Now I know that this is one line after 2, so this is 2 1/4. This is 2 1/2. I have to decide, is the end of my worm closer to the 2 1/2 or closer to the 2 1/4? I think it's closer to the 2 1/2. So I'm going to write 2 1/2 inches. Now I'm going to look at worm C. And again, line up my 0 with one end of the worm. And notice that my worm second end, the other end, is actually closer to the 2. So even though we're rounding to the nearest 1/4 inch, 2 is that nearest 1/4 inch. Remember, we've learned that that is really 8/4. Sorry, 8/4. So our nearest 1/4 inch is 8/4. But because we know equivalent fractions, we just call that 2. So it is closer to 2 inches. Okay, and in D, line up my 0. Oh, this one goes right to the 1 3/4 inch because it's 3 lines after 1 inch. Remember, 1 1/4, 1 1/2, 1 3/4. So 1 3/4 inches. If you need to, pause and play around with your ruler a little bit. Make sure you know how to use it. Okay, now my last worm, E, worm E. So notice my 0 is at one end of the worm, and this one is almost to the 1 1/4. It's gone way past the 1, but it hasn't quite reached the 1 1/4, but that is what it's closest to. So that's how I'm going to round it, 1 1/4 inches. And And my last worm, he's nice and long. Okay, let's go right at the 0. And then I measure and I go and I keep going, and he's almost 2 lines after the 2. So 2, 2 1/4, 2 1/2. Remember, that's also 2 2/4. But because we know equivalent fractions, we write it as 2 1/2 inches. Okay, now that we know our worm lengths, let's go ahead and turn to the next page. Okay, we've got our same word problem. We've got our same worms. What they suggest is to model it. You can look at an inch ruler to help you understand 1/4 inch marks. This ruler shows 1/4 inch marks. Notice they go from 0, 1/4, 1/2, 3/4, 1, 1 1/4, 1 1/2, 1 3/4, 2, 2 1/4, 2 1/2, 2 3/4, 3. Do you notice the pattern? Okay, now we can picture it. You can use an inch ruler to help you understand how to measure length to the nearest 1/4 inch. You can measure to the nearest 1/4 inch. Line up the left end of the inchworm with the 0. Notice how they did that. We did the same thing. Find the mark on the ruler that is closest to the other end of the inchworm. There we go. It's that piece in the middle. And what would we say this one is? Since it's 2 lines after the inch, so this is 1 inch, 1 1/4, 1 1/2. How about worm F? Notice we lined up at the 0. 1 inch, 2 inch. He didn't quite make it to 3, so we've got to measure in between. So notice he's a little bit longer than that half. So remember, this is 2 1/4, 2 2/4. He's a little bit, so remember, this is 2 2/4. But we write it as 2 1/2. So 2 1/2. Okay, now we're going to connect it. Now you will use the problem from the previous page to help you understand how to measure length. Complete the sentence to describe how you begin to measure earthworm A. I line up the left end of the inchworm or earthworm with, remember how we did that? Let's go back and look at A. What did we do? We lined up the 0 with the left end. So let's go back and put that. I line up the left end of the earthworm with 0 on the ruler, right? We lined him up here. Look at, picture it. Is earthworm A longer than or shorter than 1 inch? Let's go back to the picture it. Oh, there we go. Is he more than 1 inch or less than 1 inch? He is more than 1 inch. Let's go back and add that. Earthworm A is longer than. He is longer than 1 inch. Okay, the mark on the ruler that is closest to the other end of earthworm A represents, okay, let's look at that one again. It represents, the line that's closest is, we talked about it, 1 1/2. So 1 1/2 inches. Earthworm A is 1 1/2 inches long. Write this length in the table below. Earthworm A is 1 1/2 inches. Use the ruler to measure earthworms B, C, D, E, and F to the nearest 1/4 inch. Write your measurements in the table. Good thing we kept track on our picture. Let's go ahead and just substitute or transfer our information. What is earthworm B? Do you remember? 2 1/2. Okay, what is earthworm C? 2 inches. What is earthworm D? 1 3/4. What about earthworm E? E was 1 1/4. And what about F? He was 2 1/2 inches. Okay, number 6. Explain how you found the length of earthworm F. What did we do to find F? Well, we always start the same. We line up the left side at 0, right? We line up left side at 0. And then what did we do? Let's look at earthworm F. We lined it up at 0, and then we looked for the closest 1/4 mark. Okay, so then we look for the closest 1/4 mark on the right side. Okay, so time to reflect. Look back at your try it, strategies by classmates, and model it and picture it. Which models or strategies do you like best for measuring length? And you can explain. Now, some of you might like finding or measuring by using the nearest inch. It is easier to see on a ruler. If I'm using just the inches, it's a lot easier to say, oh, it's close to 1 inch or 2 inch or 3 inch. So that one can be easier to use. The nearest 1/2 inch, and I wrote half, or the nearest 1/4 inch is a little bit more difficult, but it is more accurate. And mathematicians like to be precise. So if we use the 1/2 inch or the 1/4 inch, we are more accurate, even though it might be a little bit harder to figure out the right answer. Okay, let's turn to the next page. Okay, apply it. Use what you just learned to solve these problems. Brian finds 2 more worms. He labels them G and H. What are the lengths of the worms to the nearest 1/4 inch? If you want to, pause the video and measure them on your own first, and then come back and see what we found out. Okay, G. I line up my 0 at one end of the worm on the left side, and my right side, well, look at that. He's gone way past the 1 1/4, and he's really close to the 1 1/2. So worm G is 1 1/2 inches. Now remember, that is the same thing as 1 2/4, right? It's the equivalent fraction. Okay, and in H, line up my 0. I look at my earthworm on the right side, and I notice that he's gone past the 2 1/2. And then I notice that he's getting close to 2 3/4. So this one's really close. And depending on our rulers, it might be off a little bit. So if you actually said 2 1/2, I'm okay with that. If you said 2 3/4, that's also okay. Because look at it, it's almost in the center. Now, if I had to make my best estimated guess, I would say it is closer to the half, the 2 1/2. Because it looks like it's a little bit closer, even though it's really close to 2 3/4. So I will take either answer. If you said 2 1/2, you are good. And if you said it was 2 3/4, I would also be okay with that because it was so close. Okay, both of those are good answers. Okay, worm G is 1 1/2 inches. Worm H is, I'll take either answer because I even think that was kind of close to call. Okay, number 9. You use a ruler to draw a line that is 4 1/4 inches long. Ooh, good thing we have our rulers. Let's find out, where is 4 1/4? 4 is my whole number, so I'm going to count 4 inches. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, I have to add another 1/4 inches. This is 4 inches plus 1/4, so 4 inches plus 1/4. So I'm going to draw my line. I'm going to start my line at 0. So if you need to, make a dot. And then I'm going to draw it all the way to 4 1/4. 4 inches plus another 1/4. And then I'm just going to go ahead and sketch it. There we go. There's my line, 4 1/4 inches long. Okay, number 10. Which lines are 3 inches long when measured to the nearest 1/2 inch? So they want to see to the nearest 1/2 inch. Which lines are 3 inches long? Okay, so let's see. Let's line this up. I have this at 0, and this one goes to the 3. Now, notice it is a little bit less than 3 1/4. They want the nearest 1/2 inch. So is it closer to 3 or is it closer to 3 1/2? This one's close, but look at it. It's just under that mark. So it's just a little bit closer to 3. So this one is closer to 3. Now let's look at B. I line up my 0. Oh, that one's almost 3 also. See, this is 2 1/2. So we're looking for the nearest 1/2 inch. Is it closer to this line or this line? It is closer to the 3. So this one's right. Okay, let's look at C. Line up my 0. Oh, see this one? Is it closer to the 2 1/2 or closer to the 2? This one's closer to 2 1/2. So that's not 3 inches long. Okay, in D. Let's line up the 0. Line up. Okay, now is this one closer to 3 or 3 1/2? So we are going to the nearest 1/2 inch. So is it closer to 3 or 3 1/2? It is past this mark, so it is closer to the 3 1/2. So we're not going to mark that one. Okay, and in E, let's line that up. Now we have to figure out, is it closer to the 2 1/2 or is it closer to the 3? Notice how the green is just past this mark. So it's just a little bit closer to 3 than it is to 2 1/2. So this one is 3. So I'm going to head and mark yes, or E. Okay, that is the end of session 2, my part. Now you are going to work on your part. You're going to practice measuring length, work on this on your own, and then come back and watch video number 2.